A lot of people are exploring Michigan and are traveling around the state to many of its recreational areas and its beautiful landscapes, including our beaches. But a lot of inclement weather lately has made some of those beaches a lot more hazardous than they have been before, and there are organizations in the state that are working to curb some of that and put some new rules in place as well. Joining us to talk about that and more, we're pleased to be joined by the Chief of Parks and Recreation with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, Ron Olson, with us today on the MegaCast. Ron, thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Ron, a new proposal is in the works from the director of the DNR that would limit swimming at Michigan beaches and in other waterways in certain conditions. What are those certain conditions that the DNR is looking out for with this proposal, and what would some of those requirements or restrictions be that would be put in place?
Well, basically, what we're trying to do here is beach safety is very important. On the Great Lakes, there are big natural resources, and with that comes sometimes unpredictable situations. For example, on Lake Michigan, due to its geography and the natural conditions in the lake, there are things called rip currents that occur when the winds pick up and the waves pick up and things like that. And currently we have a flag warning system, which is green, yellow, and red, and in a progressions like a stoplight type of system, where green means it's fairly calm, yellow means that the waves are a couple of feet or a bit greater, and then the red is between 3 and 5 feet, which means that the red advisory suggests people not go in the water, but it doesn't prohibit people from going into the water. In the nature of things, certain spots on the lake, as I mentioned, the wind and the waves pick up, so do the rip currents, which are kind of a dynamic that water will come in and then flows back out very powerfully back out into the lake. And when those are going on and they're strong, even an Olympic swimmer can't beat the pressure. And so there are techniques such as floating on your back and not trying to fight it and things like that. But so at any rate, also the fact is we know that it's a lot of fun on a hot day to have the waves when they're up high to jump in them and things like that. But it also, we found too that sometimes due to the sand movement and things, that there can be cavitations in the sand, and people can step in them and topple over and then become overwhelmed at times. And that's not every time. That's just occasionally that does occur, and there are certain spots that are more prevalent for that. And two areas that have a little more of the current dynamic are the Grand Haven and the Holland area for some natural reason, the way the geography of the lake and everything. So we have a lot of message signs and try to make sure that people are aware to do that. And if you're in doubt, to always wear a life jacket, or if you have kids, it's a good thing to do that, just to be prudent and safe. We do know that there are kiteboarders and surfers and people like that that recreate when the waves become high. And the purpose for what we're doing now is to focus more on people that are going to our designated beaches, which are marked off by buoys, that the outer limit is 5 feet and things like that, because we have miles of beaches that people roam along and participate in, but most of the time the access to the water comes from the designated beaches for a typical lake goer. And we know the surfers and kiteboarders enter away from there because they don't kiteboard through there. So we have, in this order, what this amounts to is giving us one more tool to be able to definitively close access to the water from the land into the water. This isn't closing beaches generally. This is just about giving us a tool to be able to definitively do that if the circumstances would put people in harm's way. And the way the metrics are set up right now is the waves would have to be approximately 8 feet, which is substantial, greater than the red flag warnings. Also, even if it's calm, it could be unhealthy conditions such as a health advisory, or there could be some natural thing like an oil slick, or there could be a problem with like at Ludington State Park a few years ago, we had a big wooden yacht that got out of control in a storm and hit ground and broke up, and the debris floated in, and we had lots of debris that sunk by the beach, and we didn't want people to go in and step on things, and on a calm day you wouldn't even know that. And we have a few other areas that are like that we need to have a definitive don't go in the water. Our goal isn't to give tickets or anything like that. It's just to give us an enforceable tool, and that's what this is about. But on the bigger picture, we're just trying to make sure that people enjoy and recreate in the outdoors safely as they can, and that's all what this is about. And it's not about giving tickets. We have lots of different orders, like dogs on leashes and certain things you can't do in a beach, like bring glass containers or have a dog on a beach, a designated beach area, unless there's a area specifically enabled for dogs, for a variety of reasons, and different other rules that we have to try to maintain a great atmosphere for people to safely enjoy themselves.
Ron Olson with us on the Oakland County MegaCast, Chief of Parks and Recreation with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. And Ron, earlier you had mentioned without this proposal in place, the flag system is in place, but there aren't necessarily punishments or consequences that are in place, other than, of course, life and death, which you would think would be enough, but clearly in some cases it's not. With this new proposal, what would be some of those additional consequences if someone were to violate a red flag warning or beyond and still venture into, frankly, dangerous waters?
Yeah, keep in mind that the trigger isn't the red flag warning. Okay. That's just an advisory. But when it got excessive, like the 8-foot tall waves, or it could be that, like I said, it could be calm, but there could be an impending storm coming across a lake that somebody may not be aware of, and maybe within an hour or something, that there could be high winds and things, and there could be triggers like that might suggest, or like I said, if there's a health advisory or some other kind of reason why going in the water would be unsafe to that extent. So the consequence would be, all we want is people to be alerted, and that you should temporarily not go into the water, and I underline the word temporary because things do change and that sort of thing. And if people resisted, we would have the ability to enforce. This would be like all our other rules, a civil infraction that would be involved, and it does carry up to in that category up to a $500 fine. But that doesn't mean that if someone was very defiant and did get a ticket that they would have to pay $500, but it's somewhere in a continuum. But our goal would not to be to write any tickets. The goal would be to simply have people not go in the water until such time that things, whatever the circumstances are, have corrected or adjusted.
Ron Olson, the Chief of Parks and Recreation at the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, joins us today on the Oakland County MegaCast, talking about a new proposal that would put a swimming ban in place under certain conditions at Michigan beaches and on Michigan waters. There's a great article about that at the Detroit News' website from July 30th, written by Beth LeBlanc. Highly encourage you to check out that article for more information on that. And Ron, in terms of if and when this proposal may be put in place, and these may end up being the rules that are in place at our waterways, at our beaches, what is the timetable as of now on that?
Well, the way the order is written now, and this would be something the department director would adopt, this would take place in the public forum during the Natural Resource Commission, of which they are advisory. They don't have policy-making authority over this particular kind of a thing. But following that meeting, the order could be adopted at that particular time, and the way it's written right now, it would go into effect. But there's a possibility that we're as to when it would go into effect the way it's written right now would go into effect in August after that date. But it's likely that it may the more focus would be for the 2022 season, but that will be determined on or about the 12th, either on the 12th or after. So that's where we are at this point. I should mention too that in there is the original order was amended, that'll be reviewed, and that puts in there the intent of enabling kiteboarding and surfing and things like that are done outside of designated beaches. So there are, we did spend time listening to the kiteboarders and surfers to make sure that that activity could still take place.
Ron Olson with us from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. He's their Chief of Parks and Recreation. And Ron, just one more question on this proposal and these potential new rules that may be in place at our beaches and our waterways. Are there any rules that are being discussed regarding piers and walkways near these waters under these conditions? Just because it's the top of my mind, I know that
right.
in years past in Grand Haven and in places like that on the pier, when there have been these large wave conditions, people have been swept off of the piers into the waters, or have jumped off the piers into the waters as they do on days of normal conditions, and have been put into an even more dangerous situation, frankly, where they are suddenly in the water, suddenly in treacherous conditions, and are potentially having their life at risk. Is there anything that's being discussed regarding rules in terms of those piers?
Well, the piers are owned by the Army Corps of Engineers. Mm-hmm. They define them as navigational piers or infrastructure for those purposes. But they have a design where you can walk out on them and people fish on them and that sort of thing. On a hot day, people do sit out there, and but it is dangerous. We do have a number of people from time to time that'll try to swim off of them, and there are signs that says you are not to enter the water from there. So it is restricted. But do people do it? Yes. And is it advisable? No. And we've had people on very windy days, particularly when the water levels were high on Lake Michigan, that literally, as you indicated, got swept off there and got overwhelmed when they were out there thinking that it was cool to watch the big waves, but they got overwhelmed and got knocked off and put them in peril. So that is something that we do work with, for example, officials from the city of Grand Haven and Holland and things like that. But that still remains a problem. But again, that's not our property, but it is signed no swimming and access to the water from that. So, at any rate, that's what that's about. Again, we don't have legal authority over those, but as I say, they are restricted from by the fact that they're signed not to do those activities.
Are there circumstances where, just because of timing or other factors, the flags can be potentially inaccurate at certain times?
Well, it could be. It depends. We are involved with across the lake consortium, if you will, of local beaches and the criteria for the access to the criteria for, I should say, erecting the flags is the same. And so, yeah, there are chances sometimes when, for example, if the wind is really blowing, and then usually sometimes in the latter part of the day, the wind will calm down, and then things will get move from a red to, say, a yellow. And it depends on our staff getting out there to change the flags and adjust the message. And we try to be very vigilant about that sort of thing so that the public know immediately what's going on. On the flip side, it could be that it's a green situation and the winds start to build, and similarly, we need to make adjustments. But usually the staff are very diligent about getting those things corrected and done.
So if there is a circumstance where visitors notice that maybe the staff hasn't been able to be out there yet to change the flags to accurately reflect the conditions, are they still expected to comply with whatever the flags are at the current time, even if it's clear that they're not accurate?
Well, yeah, but keep in mind the flag system is advisory for people. That doesn't trigger anything here. All it does is it indicates to people, and we do put big message signs on the front of the park that get changed, particularly at the busy parks like Ludington and Grand Haven and at Holland, where we get a lot of swimmers, and those are areas that tend to get a lot of attention because of the dynamics of the lake that I mentioned earlier. And so, yeah, I mean, it's something that they are advisory, so people need to take precautions. But obviously, if it's more calmer than that, well, then it is. But we haven't had a problem that I'm aware of having those not adjusted in a timely fashion.
We're joined by Ron Olson, the Chief of Parks and Recreation at the Michigan Department of Natural Resources on the Oakland County MegaCast. Ron, just a few more minutes with you before we'll say goodbye today. Let's talk about something a little closer to home here in our local area, down at Belle Isle. Of course, it's now Belle Isle State Park and has been for several years. But some of the landmarks of Belle Isle's past its zoo and its golf course have also undergone some changes over the years. And right now, the Michigan Department of Natural Resources has a quote-unquote mini master plan for repurposing those two attractions at Belle Isle. What are some of the things that are being proposed for potential changes to those locations at this time?
Well, what we're talking about there is that the old zoo that was there years ago, of course, the zoo was developed north of Detroit years ago, and that is very well established. And the zoo that once was on Belle Isle has been gone for many years. There's infrastructure that remains from the old zoo, such as elevated walkways and some of the different buildings, and many of them are in dilapidated condition. The area itself is really hard to see because vegetation has grown up along the perimeter and things like that. And so one of our projects was, in our effort to address infrastructure, was to get the very basic things back in order, like water lines and fixing up the bathrooms and very, very basic things, putting roofs on buildings that were leaking and getting caught up on a lot of the core infrastructure, which sometimes people don't see the improvements, but we've spent millions of dollars out there on a lot of stuff. But one of the areas that's in our strategic plan is to address the repurposing of the old zoo and the former 18-hole or former golf course that was out there. Now we do have a shorter learning course with a driving range on the far east end, which remains open under a arrangement with a concessioner, which is going on. But those two areas are something that we want to kind of work on planning. I call it a mini master plan, to figure out what it is that would be the best way to utilize those spaces and to repurpose them. Because, for example, at the zoo site, I mentioned old infrastructure. There's some derelict buildings that need to go away regardless, because they're eyesores and things like that. But then the question is, well, if there's any viable infrastructure that might support another use, we want to figure that out first before we take out something that could be repurposed. So the idea is we are partnering with MSU, the a planning curriculum that they have there. We partner with them, and there will be upper level students working this fall to help us jumpstart a process where we can start getting public engagement to talk about what's possible there and explore some creative ideas. We also want to engage youth involved in that, because we think that there may be some things in the park in today's world that may be missing, because a lot of the infrastructure on Belle Isle is very historic and been there a long, long time. Many things date back to the early 1900s, which is wonderful. But in today's world, if there's something that's missing there, we want to be able to identify it that would be a proper fit. Although on the continuum, it could be that maybe the area just gets, the old infrastructure gets removed and the area is restored back to a natural condition similar to the adjoining Flatwoods, which is to the east of it. So that's where we are with that. It's just the conceptual beginning of the conversation about that, and certainly we haven't even started. But this fall we will have that process and in assistance with students from the Michigan State to help us engage with the public and youth and otherwise to see where this might take us.
We're joined by Ron Olson from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources here on the MegaCast. Take a brief pause for station identification on the radio. You're listening to 89.3 WBLD Orchard Lake, West Bloomfield, Keego Harbor, Sylvan Lake, and 88.1 WBFH Bloomfield Hills. 88.1 The Biff, a service of the Bloomfield Hills School District. We're joined by Parks and Recreation Chief Ron Olson from the Michigan Department of Natural Resources. Ron, just another minute or two with you before we say goodbye today. Anything else that would be interesting for our audience to know right now, or important for them to know as they continue to venture out to our parks throughout the state of Michigan this summer?
Well, on the bigger scheme, I could tell you that we have continued to have very robust visitation. People have been out camping and lodging and enjoying themselves outdoors, and we appreciate everyone enjoying themselves and opting to go to a state park. That's why they're there, and securing their recreation passport and that sort of thing. Our numbers continue to rise. Our camping numbers this year are up substantially over last year, although COVID year was, once we got started in June 22nd, really escalated. But day use visitation has remained very strong, and we have Labor Day weekend coming up in a while, and the numbers there, we look to have well over 95, 96% occupancy at the campgrounds, which is very, very, very good. And it may be maybe get as high as 97. And that's great, because this year we're only down about 200 campsites because of construction or other things, wherein last year we were down quite a few because the construction was delayed and things like that. So we're looking to finish the year, and we potentially could hit a record year of what we call camp nights, which is counted one night per stay. And we're going to probably be well over 1.2, maybe approaching 1.3 million of those, which would be a record. We did examine history, went back into the 70s and 80s and 90s, and looks like that metric could be definitely higher than any of those years. So the point is, the park system is relevant. We think a lot of folks are enjoying themselves, and not only there, but in the trails, as well as the boating opportunities are very strongly used, as well as the recreational areas, the state forest, more rustic experience in the state forest continue to be very strongly used.
We're joined by Ron Olson from the Parks and Recreation Department of the Michigan Department of Natural Resources here on the MegaCast. Ron, thank you very much for joining us today on the program.
Great. Thank you for having the opportunity to communicate with the public, and hope everybody understands and enjoys themselves.